So I know that delta is equal to I plus E minus A, and I'll write E as sine inverse mu sine R2 minus A, right? Okay, now in this equation I know I, because the angle of incidence is given. I know angle of prism, but I don't know R2. So I need to replace R2 in terms of angle I or angle R1. This I can write as sine inverse mu times sine of R2. I can write as what? I can write as A minus R1, because I know R1 plus R2 is equal to A. Okay. Okay. Now I plus sine inverse mu sine of A minus, I need to replace R1. Now I'll apply Snell's law at this refraction point. 1 into sine of I is equal to mu into sine of R1. 1 because this is air, so this mu is 1. So I'll get R1 is as sine inverse of sine I by mu. This I can write as sine inverse sine I by mu minus A. So my final answer for delta is I minus A plus sine inverse mu sine A minus sine inverse sine I by mu. Okay, so this is my delta. Now if we plot delta versus I, if I plot delta versus I, then what I'll get is a curve like this. Okay, the first thing you should note here is that the curve may look like a parabola, but the curve is actually not a parabola. It is not a parabola, because you see that in this expression you don't get a term which looks like a parabolic equation. Also, this curve is not a symmetrical curve. It's not a symmetrical curve. Okay. One other thing to note in this curve is that for two angles of incidences, I1 and I2, the angle of deviation is the same. Okay. Now my question is, given a prism, if I tell you that this is my prism, this is my angle I1, this angle is the angle of emergence, and this is some delta naught. Okay, this is delta naught. Now my question is, if I give you I1, can you find I2 without using the equation? Without using the equation which I had discussed a few minutes before, can you find I2? Okay, let me put it in other words. My question is, let's say, why do I get two angles for a particular delta? Why do I have two angles like I1 and I2? Okay, try thinking in terms of principle of reversibility, which I had already discussed long back. Try applying your knowledge of principle of reversibility and try to figure out why there are two angles for a particular delta, or in other words, why do I have, or in other words, if I give you I1, can you find I2? Let's see. You know that if this is the incident ray and this is the refracted ray, so light is traveling in this path. Now if I reverse the situation, if I throw a light in this direction with E as my angle of incidence, okay, angle of incidence. Now, according to the principle of reversibility, the light will retrace the same path, right? So, if I make a ray of light incident at an angle E, it will retrace its path like this, and in that case, angle I1 will become the emergent angle. And what is the deviation in this case? The deviation in this case is still delta naught. So, that means whether I give an angle of incidence I1 or I give an angle of incidence E, the angle of deviation is still delta naught. So now you tell me what's the answer. What is I2? Can you find I2? I2 is nothing but angle E, right? So it's very clear that if the angle of incidence is I1 or if the angle of incidence is angle E, both the cases the angle of deviation is delta naught. Okay, now so you see that for every delta there exists two angle of incidence for which you get the same delta. Now my question is, what is this? What is delta minimum? You see that delta decreases, reaches the minimum and then increases again. So my question is, what is this minimum delta? You see that when delta is minimum, you get a single angle. Okay, you get a single angle at delta minimum. That means what? This angle, angle I, and this is the emergent angle. In other cases, what was happening was you are getting two angles, right? But in this case, you are getting a single angle. That means what? That means that angle I and angle E are the same angles. That's why you are getting a single value. And what does that mean? Angle I and angle E are same. That means the refraction that is occurring is symmetrical about the prism. It's symmetrical. Now when it's symmetrical, that means everything goes about symmetry. That means what? This angle of refraction, now since this angle of incidences are same, that means this angle R1 and this angle R2 are also same. That means R1 is equal to R2, I is equal to E. So what is my delta minimum? Okay, now let's see what's delta minimum. R1 plus R2 is equal to A. So R1 is what? R1 is A by 2 because R1 is equal to R2. Also you know that I plus E minus A is delta minimum. So both are same in this case. So 2I is equal to delta minimum plus A, or I is equal to delta minimum plus A whole divided by 2. Now, what is mu? Mu is sin I by sin R. Now, what is sin I? Sin I is sin of delta minimum plus A by 2. And what is R? R means angle R1, that is equal to A by 2. So this is my mu. Now to find delta minimum, if you know mu, you know A. So there's one equation and one unknown. So you will be able to find out what delta minimum is. Okay.